Welcome, everybody. How y'all doing? Mic check, 1 2 1 2. All right, I think we're pretty good here. How's everyone doing here? Saw Willing, Quest, Lewis. Welcome, fellas. I know there's some few more people in here as well. Sup, televised. How y'all doing? Excited to be back here for another live stream. I loved it last time. It was just something exciting about it. You know, I've made so much like content over the years, and like, man, there's nothing quite like doing it live because you just can't like second guess things, and there's just an excitement to it. There's people there, all that kind of stuff. Like, even if I didn't have any viewers, I might just do it live anyway, just because it's just more fun. Kind of feels like you get to be a bit more raw with things. So what do I got planned for today? Well, we're going to be looking at dignity again. Now, before you roll your eyes, because I know some people, like, they just don't really care about this. And it's like, just like probably the worst topic for a self-improvement person to hit on if they're trying to get clickbait and views and that kind of thing. But this one's just so powerful. And I just did a video in the Frontline Masculinity series about this a week or two ago. And, you know, I go and like, I kind of give like a super concise and structured overview of that kind of stuff. But there is so much stuff I had to leave out there that I think is really important. So I just figured, you know, I'm going to do like one more like deep dive into dignity because I just want this resource available to people. I don't want them to have to pay anything for it. I don't want them to have to go through one of my programs or whatever. This is just like so important that I feel like for the world in general. So like, if you get value out of this stuff, applying it into your life, this is one of those ones that, you know, this in the previous video, send this to people that you care about, you know, your bros who you're, you know, talking self-development with or whatever. If you find it useful, because I want to figure out how to get this stuff out. And sometimes the only way to do it is through word of mouth. So, okay, let's get into this here. Like, what I got to preface all of it. Like, how do I want to start this? Well, the best way to preface this is saying that, like, over a decade of this work, being a men's coach, you know, I've worked with tons and tons of guys, you know, thousands of people have gone through my programs. I've coached like hundreds of guys individually, you know, like all this other kind of stuff. And just like, I've got a pretty big sample size now of like what guys struggle with, what works, what doesn't, etc. And I found that like, far and away, one of the biggest reasons, the biggest like culprits for a man being held back in his life is basically a lack of dignity. And dignity, it's a super simple concept on the surface. It's really just a claim that you have unconditional value and worth. So like, no matter whether your status goes up or down, whether you get more fit, more successful, less successful, more money, less money, people like you, people don't, regardless of all those status fluctuations, at your core, you have a fundamental sense of worth. And why is this such a big deal? Well, that's really what I want to get into here today. I want to make it super crystal clear to you guys, because it's just tricky to trying to figure out how to sink your teeth into this concept. And the reason like guys tend to get this when they go through one of my programs is because I'm showing them exactly how to apply it to their life and to their pain points. And then when they start doing it, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that feels so much better. Oh, I'm making all this progress. Oh, I'm filled with all this motivation. And so how I want to kick this thing off is to kind of like just dive into some key areas where guys tend to struggle with dignity. And then I want to just talk about them because chances are you struggle with one or more of these issues. And when you hear how it plays out, then you're going to be able to, I think, to hook into it. You're going to start seeing the value and you're going to want to go deeper into this because really, you know, this dignity concept is huge. It's deep. And later in this call, I'm actually going to be talking about some more of the societal stuff with it. I'm going to be talking about like how to claim your dignity, how like this concept literally transformed the world. But up front here, I just want to make it super practical to you guys. So let's go ahead and get into this. All right. So one of the first big signs that you've got a dignity issue is that you consistently abandon your own goals. All right. So this is something that guys struggle with constantly. They set a goal, they work toward it a little bit, and then they fall off, right? That's kind of like the whole The whole challenge that the self-improvement industry is built around is so that you can stop doing that. And I guess some people, they can't even do that. They can't even get themselves started and then fail. They just can't even start. And so at the heart of this, I would say, is this lack of dignity, meaning basically you don't think you're worth the effort. That's the bottom line, is that if you can't get started and you can't sustain, is that somewhere along that line, you stopped thinking you were worth the sacrifice to making it happen. And this is a major problem because our limbic brain, it's like this big calculator, right? In a lot of ways, it's kind of a primitive calculator, but pretty much what it does is it's constantly calculating whether something's going to be worth the effort or not, because we only have a finite amount of energy as humans. And if we spend that energy poorly, well, we could die, especially, our hunter-gatherer ancestors. If they invested their energy poorly, they would probably die, almost certainly would. And so we're very energy conscious. And if you want to have a perpetual reason to continue to use your energy for your own benefit, you got to think you're worth it. And it can't be tied to any sort of like circumstantial things. It can't be tied to whether, people around you like you. It can't be tied to whether, you're currently getting success or not. Because at the end of the day, if you want this consistent progress, you have to be unconditionally worth the effort. And that's what dignity is. It's basically saying, yeah, I'm worth it. Okay. So if you struggle with this, then you got to ask yourself, it's like, at what point do you disconnect from your sense of worth? Right. And a lot of times this happens unconsciously. A lot of times there's agitating factors. You're tired, you're stressed, there's something that's upsetting you. But even a lot of those things, as we'll get into it, are also tied into dignity issues themselves. But if you get this core idea that you're constantly, perpetually, perfectly worth showing yourself love and sacrificing for, then you're going to be able to make smooth progress. So I want to get into the next point now. And this is one of the ones that I think really just kills guys. And it's a lack of confidence or fear, or maybe just even anxiety in certain kinds of social situations. And the reason why this hurts guys so much is because we're profoundly social creatures, us humans, right? Some people, I guess, are wired more to be loners, but even most of those types, unless you're like that extreme outlier, like monk who wants to go live in the woods kind of thing, every single person is going to benefit from some kind of social interaction because you're built for it. We're social creatures down to the wiring of our brain. And when you have these blocks to interacting socially, whether it's, you don't feel comfortable going out and meeting new people, you feel like you need to impress people, you feel like people are judging you, you feel like, you can't approach a woman that you're interested in, all this kind of stuff, it really kind of halts your life development. You can halt your career development too. I mean, networking is obviously super powerful in the career sense, but also, performance-based stuff. Like how do you feel in the office? How do you feel in that hierarchy? How are you talking to people who are in positions above you? All of these kinds of things, if you have resistance and fear around them, then you're going to really slow yourself down. And ultimately, this again, it comes down to a dignity thing, because what happens is when you don't have a strong sense of personal dignity, you're going to be in a position where you need to get something from the people around you, because what you're looking for then is you're looking for them to validate you. You need to get their affirmation, or else you're not going to feel good enough because you think that their opinion defines you, right? And so this is where people will start sometimes coping by wearing masks. They won't be their authentic self. They'll try to behave like how the cool kids want them to behave, or they'll put on some kind of strong front to try and trick people into thinking that they're something other than they are, or whatever it is. And this leads to, faulty behavior, inauthentic behavior. And even if people get to like you like that, they're not liking the real you. They're liking some kind of fabricated version of you. And in the romantic scene, this is even more intense because you're going to be trying to get this woman to sexually affirm you. And if you don't get that, well, then it's it hits guys so deep, right? And so that's why there's so much anxiety around it. I know a lot of guys who are hyper confident, social, outgoing, etc. But when it comes time for them to actually interact with a woman, it's they're so scared, they're so nervous, they can't do it because they're really worried about that rejection, right? Because they think if they don't get affirmed, then they're just not good enough, and it hits them deep. Now, if you have a sense of dignity, then this whole kind of grasping at validation thing gets reversed, because from the dignified perspective, your whole role is to just acknowledge, hey, I'm good. I'm fundamentally good. And my whole goal in a social situation is just to share that goodness in whatever is a contextually beneficial way. So, for example, like if you're going on a date with a girl, you don't need to get her to like you. You just need to share the good parts of yourself that you have with her. You know, you're giving something. You're coming from a place of gift. You're sharing your attention, your sense of humor, your thoughts, your time, your energy, sometimes even your money. You're taking her out on a date, like these kinds of things. You're there to share. And this can be applied to every single sort of like social dynamic. So, for example, like if you're going for a job interview, you know, like I was a computer science major in college, and I wasn't a particularly good one because I didn't study very well because I had, you know, I was pretty messed up in college. But, you know, I got every job I interviewed for, even if I wasn't quite qualified, because I went into it with a sense of dignity. Instead of me getting interviewed, I viewed it as, hey, we're having a conversation here. I'm interviewing you as much as you're interviewing me because I know I have value. I've got people skills. I've got the ability to work. I've got the ability to focus. And so it was like I was here sharing the good of myself, and I was letting them share what they could offer me. And coming at that level of power parity, in a sense, it just makes you seem more valuable. And that holds true with dating. It holds true with the social situation. And it's like you want dignity because people can feel it. They can feel it when you've got a strong sense of yourself. So socially, obviously, it's a big deal. Now, it also has a big impact on just the way you feel sort of like psychologically, like setting your psychological baseline. Because I know many people, men and women, really struggle with this kind of background feeling of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough, right? And this can just like physiologically, this is like a stress scenario. It's like there's a little alarm bell that's constantly going off in your mind, like a little smoke detector that's constantly chirping at you, right? And sometimes it goes into a full-blown fire alarm, but it's just not comfortable. It keeps you from ever really stepping into a real state of peace, because what you're doing is you're judging your worth based upon your status, you know, where I'm at in the world, and you feel like you don't measure up because there's always more status to be gained. There's always someone with more status than you. And it creates this like baseline of anxiety, unease, and just a lack of peace. But if you were able to just sink down into, hey, I'm actually good, then that whole little chirping, that alarm bell, it goes off, it stops, right? And then you can just calmly start showing up in the way that you want in life. And this has a big impact on your ability to avoid things like escapism, like porn, gaming, scrolling, all that kind of stuff. Because so much of that, we use that to basically drown out this alarm bell that's constantly going off in our head. So if you want more of that kind of peace, and you want it to be easier for you to change your habits and that sort of thing, then you got to embrace your worth. So when you're doing this kind of stuff, if you decide to embrace your dignity, then one of the biggest areas that's going to change in your life is the way that you talk to yourself. Because like if you don't have dignity, like it's almost impossible to avoid beating yourself up. Like there's so many guys out there who are just brutal in their own heads, and they actually feel justified for it. They feel like, hey, I'm underperforming in XYZ metric, and because of that, I suck. And it's appropriate for me to shit on myself constantly, right? And so it's like they go in this kind of spiral of, hey, I'm not good enough, I'm got to beat myself up, and then if I do that right, well then maybe it'll get me to take some action. And the problem with this is that while it might work sometimes, it's rarely ever sustainable, and you just get sick of that voice in your own head, and then boom, you turn toward escapism. And also just makes you far more nasty in general, and irritable, and less fun and enjoyable. So, there's this massive cascade effect around of like what's in your head and then what comes out in your life. And so that's a big problem, because if you rely on self-criticism, self-hatred, inspiring fear inside of yourself to take action, then you're going to be kind of stuck. And this is one of the things that I've run into with particularly my more high-performing clients, like the guys who are, successful, they're good at their career, they're making a bunch of money, this kind of thing. These guys, they tend to have an issue with dignity because they actually rely on this self-hatred. They rely on this, basically the fear of their own inner critic to get them to take action. And they like when I introduce the concept of dignity to them, their number one like hesitancy is like, shit, if I do that, if I just say I'm good, if I just decide that I have an inherent worth, then how the hell am I going to scare myself into being productive? And, if that's the only kind of motivation that that's a very valid concern. And it can be quite scary to do that. Maybe you built all your success on using this energy, and I'm here telling you to throw it away because it's, they've come to me saying that it's been ruining their life. And so you have to believe that there's another way to do this, that there is actually a way to generate motivation and discipline without treating yourself in an undignified manner. And guess what? There is, okay? There is. It just, the energy flows in the complete opposite direction. And that's why it feels weird. Instead of like beating yourself up so you can grasp at this status, like being like, hey, you suck down here, you got to go get up here. You instead say, hey, I'm already good. In fact, I'm so good. I need to let this out. I need to let this flow through me. I need to try and get everything in my life to reflect this goodness. The way that I show up at work, the way that I show up in my relationships, the way I treat myself in terms of my routines, my habits, my diet, my exercise, all this kind of stuff. I want that to reflect the goodness inside of me, so that it actually works in alignment with who I really am. And I'm not just, basically fighting myself, fighting my nature of goodness in the way that I live my life. And when you can embrace this, it's a much more, I used to describe this as radiant versus vacuous energy. Like dignified energy is radiant. It comes from your core and it radiates out like a light. But when you're coming from a place of just status obsession, it's like you're with this black hole who's just grasping constantly. And more points, etc. And you're never going to be full from that. So this, like, when you start stepping into this, like, this really solves another one of the major problems that guys deal with in the self-improvement space, is that they feel like self-development is like this massive grind where you must constantly be forcing yourself forward. And that like this is how I felt for so long. It's like, in order for me to level up in life, it was just an equation of how much pain I could like whip myself into facing. Okay. And with dignity, it's not like that at all. It's not like that. It's not about how much am I willing to suffer. It's about what I think is most good. How can I express my desire for the things that I want most in a good and radiant fashion? And like, this is really important, particularly in the way that like this internal self-talk like plays out, particularly like in your decision making and in the way that you actually approach your goals. So here's how many guys kind of do this stuff, is that like they say, all right, I want to improve something. Maybe I want to improve my fitness. And when they do this, then they just like lock in and they'll like look up a program on YouTube by whoever's the most popular. They'll be like, all right, I just have to follow their program. I got to follow their exercise program. I got to follow their discipline. I got to do their ice baths. I got to do XYZ. And there's no other conversation about it. And they just try and force themselves through it to take action. And, they probably have a lot of emotional resistance to it. And so they just try and punch through that wall. And ultimately, this is an undignified approach to things because like, think about it like this. Imagine you went to a doctor, okay, and you had like some kind of like stomach issue or something like that. And the doctor, without even talking to you, without, examining you, without getting some imaging or understanding your medical history or whatever, he just hands you a prescription, okay? Now, you could take that prescription, but what if it's a really nasty medicine? It may work, it may not, but it certainly, is unpleasant. And he gave you nothing to have it buy in for you. And it's like, in this kind of situation, the chances of that kind of treatment working, where you're having basically a doctor who doesn't give a shit and just forces something on you, the chances of that working is very, very low. That would be an undignified interaction with a doctor. Basically, he doesn't give a shit about you. He's just treating you as like a little conduit for him to perform a mechanism. And this is what we do to ourselves, is that we objectify ourselves when we don't give ourselves dignity. We fail to actually look at our circumstances. We fail to actually understand what we really want. We fail to understand where we're at psychologically, what's going on in our life, and we just try and force things on ourselves. So when you're starting to embrace dignity, so much of this is about like actually getting to know what is the right fit for you. It's about giving dignity to your emotions, to your thoughts, to your circumstances, and trying to cobble together basically a resonant path forward that actually clicks with where you're at. And if you do this right, well, then you're going to be able to find a plan that, well, first of all, you're going to be able to find a goal you really want, and then you're going to be able to find a plan that you actually want to follow, and then you're going to be able to actually think in a way and motivate yourself in a way where you like doing the action. And so, yeah, it feels like more work on the surface because you got to dig into yourself. And obviously this becomes easier with practice, but when you don't do this, it actually ends up being way more work because you never actually get anywhere. You just keep trying stuff and failing things, getting on the diet, off the diet. You start the business and then you unplug from the side business because it's too hard or whatever. And so it's like, if you want sustainable power, it's got to line up with this big energetic system of your, of your psyche. And if it's coming from a place of lack, then you're pulling from an empty well. You're going to run out at some point. So let's see what some of you guys are saying here in the chat. Guardian says, dignity means never needing to sleep with someone that cheats on you forever, no matter how good the sex was. It could mean that, yeah. But it could also mean that dignity means forgiving someone who cheated on you. I'm not necessarily saying that's the right move, but like, you're going to break up a marriage, make a kid live without a broken home because someone cheated on you. Maybe that's the right move. But maybe, you recognize that, hey, their actions don't define them either. It's like one of those things where you can go deeper with everything and figure out what do you actually want most? What is the highest expression of your dignity? Let's see. Quest says, I'm fully convinced of the idea that I'm inherently dignified and good, but I think I'm a long way from this fully sinking in to the way that I actually think and act. Yeah. Yeah, that's a common thing. And so I got some more stuff here, but let's start moving into that part. How do we actually start embracing our dignity in a practical level? What are like the steps that we need to take? Well, the first thing is we've got to psychologically buy in to the process. All right. And it sounds like, Quest, you're already there, but a lot of guys actually get stuck on this. Some people, they have trouble believing that this is true. And so on the simple level, you got to just choose it, right? It's a philosophical choice. It's like you can call a glass half full, or you can call a glass half empty. It's like, which world would you rather live in? Which mindset would you rather live in? And from a purely pragmatic sense, I would argue that dignity is more effective, more authentic, leads to greater discipline, and feels basically 1 billion times better than living in an undignified place. But for a lot of guys, that's not enough. And so what are the objections that people have to dignity? Well, one of the big ones, and this is one that a lot of guys will harbor, even if they're not conscious of it, which is they believe that they are defined by their actions. Like they think that, hey, I'm not good. Look at what I've done. A man is defined by his actions. And you've probably heard things like this before too. And so I get that, it's on one level, there's like this feeling of like, hey, if you're not doing the actions, like something's off. Like if someone's constantly doing terrible things and they're claiming to be a man of God, like obviously you're going to question that person's integrity. But it's a little more complex than that. Okay. So for example, say you were trying to do a good deed, but it turned wrong. Would you be good or bad in that situation, right? Like, so for example, say you have a girl you just started dating and it's her birthday and you go through all this effort to make her dinner. And as she's eating, she's like, oh, this is delicious. What's in this? And you're like, oh, yeah, I put some peanut sauce in it and blah, blah, blah. And then she's like, what? Peanut sauce? And then she goes into anaphylactic shock because she's allergic to peanuts. Okay. In that situation, did you fail? Did you do something bad? You'd be like, well, I mean, on one level, yeah, because you kind of poisoned her with something she was allergic to, but also not because you were coming from a good place, you didn't know, etc. And so when we look at this, we realize that actually intention matters. And even the law recognizes this. It's like the difference between, first and second degree murder. Did you plan to kill someone, or did it happen kind of like in the heat of the moment? Did it happen by accident, even like manslaughter, like you hit someone with a car and you didn't even mean to? Like, intention really does matter. So you can't just say a man is purely defined by his actions, because your actions might have led to terrible consequences, but they might not have been coming from a bad place. Now, the next objection to this is like, yeah, but Mark, I've done knowingly bad stuff. I knew it was bad. And a lot of times guys will carry, huge amounts of guilt from stuff they've done previously. Maybe they've, been bad in relationships or bad to family members, or they just like really underperformed. They screwed up their life, etc. And they hold all this, shame, guilt, anger, whatever, and they carry it around with them, and it weighs them down like a 1,000-pound backpack. And here's the thing. Knowing something and feeling something are different things. And we have to have some compassion for the fact that we really operate on feeling way more than our knowing. Because in order for us to operate purely on knowing and override our feeling, we have to have this prefrontal cortex part just like override the limbic part of our brain, the feeling part of our brain. And this is something that's kind of difficult to do. And it takes a lot of energy, and it requires you to be like pretty bought into it in the first place. There's a lot of things that have to go right for you to completely override your emotions. So in that case, it's like, all right, well, we can't even do that all the time. But if we're going to take this deeper, I would argue that all of our emotions, every single emotion, ultimately is desiring something good. Always. Now, you might say, well, clearly I desire to do bad things sometimes. I desire to, smack my wife when she's being a bitch, or I desire to, watch some porn or something like this. And, you probably act these different things out on different levels. Hopefully you're never smacking your wife, but maybe the impulse is there and you're like, well, see, I know that's a bad emotion. How could you say that all emotions are good? Well, the thing is, if you go down deeper into the emotion, it's looking for something. Right? It's looking for something ultimately good. So, let's take a super extreme example. Okay. Like if you killed someone, okay, well, why would you do that? Why do people murder other people? Well, maybe what they're looking for is a sense of retribution. Maybe they're looking for a sense of power. Maybe they're a hitman and they're looking for money. Okay. Those core aims, power, maybe it's justice, retribution, maybe it's money even. The pursuit of those things, the desire of those things is not bad. The problem is obviously the way in which we are pursuing it, right? And this is like kind of like a spiritual point, but I think it's, practical enough to make, is that there's this idea in Christianity that Satan can't make anything. All he can do is pervert and twist the good things that God has already created. And so like when we step into dignity and we're working with our own emotions, a big part of it is just learning how to go down to the core of our emotions and untwist them. Okay. So it's like, one of the main things that I teach guys when it comes to like habit change, or for example, is if they've got a craving for something they're trying to quit, say porn. Okay. When they've got a porn craving, the goal is like on the surface, they want porn. Call that a bad desire. But if you trace the roots of that down, there's something else that you want, right? Like, what do you really want in that moment? Maybe it's stress relief. Maybe it's, comfort. Maybe it's like a sense of relaxation. Maybe it's just you want to get some freaking pleasure in your day because the rest of your day was terrible. Maybe it's a sense of, validation, even if it's faulty and virtual. It's like, I don't feel like I'm succeeding anywhere else in life, or I'm not succeeding in the places I care about most. And when I step into porn, I get to feel like this, powerful stud. I get to feel like I'm someone who's having sex with a beautiful woman, and that's incredibly validating. Well, those things, if we boil them down, they're all good things. It's like, I want to feel like I'm rested. I want to feel like I'm successful. I want to feel like I'm getting pleasure, right? These are good aims. And the reason I bring all this up is because this truth that I would say is at the heart of every desire, it says something about our nature. It says that we are fundamentally good at our core. And if you can accept that, if you can really embrace that, then that means that you're good, right? That's like my best logical justification for someone who's struggling to claim their dignity is like, I challenge you. Look at all your desires. Heck, even look at all the worst things you've done in your life. What was the good thing that you're pursuing there? Just maybe in a disordered way, in an unhelpful way, and maybe even an evil or bad way. Okay. What was the good thing you were aiming at? And so if you're willing to find that and you find all that, you realize every single time, there's something good that I was looking for. It's like, shit, I am good. That's my nature. And so I just need to make sure that all the way that I express these desires gets untwisted. And when you can do this, it unlocks the ability for like basically effortless discipline. All right. It allows you to learn how to eventually move from your core to take your biggest desires and act on them. And it's really actually pretty easy to act on the things you want to do. We just got to make sure that all the wires are not crossed and they're lined up to the right things. Let's see what the chat here says. K-Dot says, recently watched your sexual self-mastery series, very helpful. Nice. Exactly, real desire lays deeper rather than actually wanting to explore or wanting to watch pixels on a screen. Exactly. Yes. And so it's like, if you're struggling with porn or any other bad habit, one of the number one things that you're going to want to find is what's the main thing that I'm running away from? What's the main unmet desire that's creating pain inside of me that I'm trying to just basically numb through acting out through some form or another? Okay. What's the thing I'm trying to do? And then when you find that thing, maybe it's loneliness. It's like, okay, shit, instead of I don't want to be lonely. Instead of going to porn, what's a better way to deal with that desire? It's like, I got to connect with people, right? And so if you start doing that, all of a sudden that desire to escape is going to be brought down because that desire is being met. And then boom, it makes it 10 times easier. You can't just cut out bad habits, right? You can't just say, no, don't do that bad thing. Because if you do that, then that unmet desire, it's not even going to be getting numbed anymore. And it's just going to ache even more intensely. And usually then that's when, people just can't take it. You just can't can't keep that, pressure valve contained, and it's going to just spill out in an uncontrolled manner. And you're going to eventually relapse at some point. You're going to fall off the diet. You're going to fall off your porn reboot. You're going to quit your exercise regimen. You're going to, stop building that side hustle. And then you're just going to play a bunch of video games, like that kind of stuff. So that's one big piece of it is like, if you're having trouble with your dignity, find the goodness underneath all your desires and start honoring them. Now, another objection that I've run into a few times now to dignity is actually from Christians in particular, like specifically like the very fire and brimstone style Christians, who are big fans of the harsh God. And they're very hooked on this sinful nature aspect of humanity. And I don't deny that we have a sinful nature. At least in Catholic theology, they would call it concupiscence, which really means a tendency to sin. And you can't argue that. We have a tendency to get our desires, twisted up and pursue bad things, right? Even if we're ultimately looking for something good, we have a habit of messing stuff up, right? And so a lot of guys, they'll internalize this and be like, well, that means I'm bad. And I just don't think that's possible. Like if you're one of these Christians who's listening to this at some point, I don't think you can call yourself Christian and also say that you're intrinsically bad. And because let's think about it. All right. So if you sacrifice for a bad thing, all right, if you give something up for a bad outcome and you do it purposefully, can we call that a good action? I would say no. Like if you sacrifice your health so that you can enjoy the pleasurable mouthfeel of stuffing your face with pizza and junk food all day, is that a good move? No, of course not, right? Like we would all obviously say that. Maybe, they're pursuing something good in that moment, like relief or whatever, but they're sacrificing a greater good for a lesser good, i.e., so then the whole thing's not a good move. Now, if you follow me there, then the question would be, all right, how could Jesus be perfectly good if he gave up his life for you? And if you saying you're a bad thing, fundamentally, right? Like, because he's sacrificing literally his whole life for something that you're calling bad, which would be your life, your sense of self. And so it's like that logic just doesn't work out. Instead, this dignity concept, it has very huge spiritual implications. It's this idea that we are made in the image and likeness of God, that we've got the spark of the Creator inside of us. And no matter how much we screw things up, this spark is permanent, right? It's fundamentally good. And even if you're missing the mark left and right, there's still something worthwhile inside of you in your life. And this concept, which started primarily as a spiritual concept, and to my knowledge, it started with Christianity. If anyone has any, argument against that, I'm interested to hear it, because the concept of dignity started with, I think, the whole Christian ethos of like, God decided to die for you and said you were good, even though you're all shitty sinners. He said there was something redeeming, worth redeeming in every single one of you. And if you look at it like that, then what happened with this, the story of Christianity is that it introduced this idea that every single person has unconditional worth, i.e. has dignity. And it took a while to spread around, and it kind of became more of like a abstract concept, a legal concept, et cetera, et cetera. But from the way that I'm tracing it, this was the foundation of all of Western civilization. This was the thing that really allowed the fundamental shifts that have let the West thrive and turn into the most, successful, prosperous, society that the world has ever known. So, like, what are some big points that flow from this place of dignity? Well, one is you can't genocide people, because genocide is pretty much saying that, hey, you lack some sort of conditional characteristic. Maybe it's you don't have the right religion, you don't have the right race, maybe you just don't speak the right language, whatever. Genocide says, oh, well, you lack the right characteristic, so you don't mean as much, so I can kill you, right? And I'm not arguing that Christians or anyone has practiced this perfectly, but generally, this is the idea, is that if everybody has dignity, then you can't just kill people. And also, it means you can't even discriminate them. You can't hold people down just because there's someone that you don't like. And that's obviously massive. This was something that just wasn't even thought of as a possibility prior to Christianity, as far as I know, because, people were constantly warring with each other. They were constantly enslaving each other. Like the whole anti-slavery movement, it primarily sprung out of this Western tradition, this Christianity-based tradition. And people are like, yo, this isn't cool. And like I said, it took a long time for it to really get fleshed out, because humans are slow to change, particularly in a disconnected society that's not all hooked up to the internet. Ideas take a long time to change, but eventually it got there. And then the other things started to stem from this, right? Like, I guess maybe if there was an argument for a pre-Christian version of dignity, it would have been something like the ancient, democracies, like of Greece and stuff like that. But even then it was very conditional. It's like, hey, you have to be a certain kind of citizen or whatever. But if you have that conditionality, well then, hey, you've got a certain kind of set of rights, right? Like you've got a certain set of, inalienable like goodness to you. You can only be subject to certain kinds of, like punishment and legal stuff. But it was like, eventually, when we realized this concept of universal dignity, we realized everybody needs this. Everybody needs certain kinds of rights. We need to be able to have free speech, equality under the law, innocent until proven guilty. It's like why even people who are, convicted of heinous crimes, they still have certain rights. Why is this? Because the founders of America, at least, they believe that these rights were granted by God, i.e. there is something deeper going on at play. There's some sort of fundamental characteristic to an individual that makes it so that you can't just take certain things away from them. You have to allow them that, that little spark of dignity, right? And so, actually, before we move on, let me see what you guys are saying to that. Talking about other stuff. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about here is sort of the gigantic spiritual battle that I see waging in the world today. And this is probably something as old as time itself, if you're going to believe in the spiritual traditions, particularly of those of the West. But if you look at the story of Satan, like the fall of Lucifer, okay, what was he? Well, according to the story, he was God's most beautiful angel, one of his greatest creations. So in terms of status, he was right up at the top, right? Like he was the hottest shit around, pretty much. And the idea that is kind of put out there is that the reason why Satan fell, why he rebelled against God, is because he refused to ever bow down to a human, because there's this idea that, hey, God's like, hey, Lucifer, guess what? I'm gonna, the logos, my other aspect, like he's gonna become human. And then Satan's like, what? You're gonna put him into this lower life form than me? I'm not going to bow down to this. This is insanity. And then, he got kicked out of heaven, etc. Because basically he thought he was better than that. And the like playing out of that is that I believe that there's kind of two realms that a person can operate in. And this is why I think like humans are kind of like the battleground of all the spiritual forces in the universe, because we can operate within these two realms. We've got a hellish, like demonic place where we can operate, and then we've got a heavenly, divine, holy place that we can operate from. And the big difference between them is really this idea of dignity. So like hell, if I was going to imagine what it's like, I believe that basically it's an absolute status hierarchy where the most powerful people get to rule and do whatever they want to the people who are less powerful than them. That's it. And if you look at the world today, those are always the worst places that exist, where the strong get to do whatever the hell they want to the people beneath them. And so like the people in the middle, they get beat up by the people in the top, and then they shit on the people that are beneath them. And you just basically might makes right. And so much of this is still massively pervasive in our society today. And I think this is where so much of the poison in our world comes from, if not all of it. And you can feel it, especially online, especially on social media. It's like, hey, are you hot? Well, you're better than ugly people. It's like, hey, do you got money? Well, guess what? You're better than the people who don't have money. It's like all this kind of stuff. And we're constantly bombarded with these, you're better if you're higher, and you're worse if you're lower. And some people, they manage to turn this into productive stuff, and they do good things with their life or whatever. But I think for so many of us, it's making us miss the core point of life. It's making us miss the beauty of life. And it's putting us in this constant rat race, this constant struggle to try and claw our way up and to essentially be better than the people who are beneath us. And when you're down at the bottom, this idea of dignity is super appealing because it's like, shoot, I'm not actually worse because I don't in my core and my fundamental human value, because I don't have all these things. Oh, that feels so nice. And I think this is why, Jesus primarily targeted the poor, the sick, the tax collectors, whatever, the people who were outcast, because he knew that they were going to be receptive to his message. And then the people who had power, like the Pharisees and whatnot, he was pretty rough with those guys because he knew that they felt like they already had what they wanted. They liked their power, they liked their status, and they liked feeling superior, right? This is why he criticized the guy who even religiously did his fasting and made a big show of it. And he's like, oh, I'm giving up so much for God right now. I'm making these massive donations. Aren't I so good? He's just trying to gather spiritual points. Like he's completely disconnected from this more divine world, which I would call the kingdom of God, which is essentially the mindset of dignity, where everybody's fundamentally good. Everyone deserves love. And that the way we express that love, it's got to be contextual. It's got to make sense in the world, right? People will pervert this mentality a lot. And this is one of the big things that I think the left has finally kind of gotten caught for, the collective consciousness has finally caught up to the fact that communism and things like that, it's like a fake version of the kingdom of God. It's like, hey, we're going to just force everybody to get all the good stuff. We're going to take control. We're going to, have open borders. We're going to do all this kind of shit. And in reality, it's just weaponized compassion. Like real love, it's not illogical. It makes sense. It allows for something that can grow and prosper. And if you're trying to pursue good in a way that's just destructive and it destroys all goodness, That's not really good, right? So what we want to be stepping into is this world where actually, yeah, everyone matters, including me. And what's the way that I can just share the goodness inside of me in a sustainable way, right? So it's like, you gotta have money if you want to like build your sphere of influence. Like this is something that I've had to struggle with a lot as a coach and a business owner, is like, I'd love it to just be able to put everything I have out there for free, just help everyone, give it all away. And, if anyone's super rich and wants to finance my work, I would love to do that. But at the end of the day, if I'm not making any money, I'm not feeding my family, I'm not paying my bills, I can't do this work, right? So it's like you have to build something that's sustainable, right? Or else the goodness gets shut off. It's not abundant. But if we're going to like drill it down even further, this kingdom of God idea, and we're going to look at it more as the kingdom of ourself, I think it gets even more interesting because like what Jesus or Christianity did, this dignity mindset did, is it sort of inverts the hierarchy. So it's like, the famous Bible quotes, like what does it say exactly? It's like the first will be last and the last will be first. And, I used to really struggle with this. It's like, man, I want to be at the top. I want to be the dude who's the man, the top dog. And what I realize now is really what it's talking about is like, where does the energy need to flow? And so if you're trying to build a great society, for example, if you really want to make it stable, you really want to like let it thrive, you want to let it like, take off like a rocket, well, then you got to make sure that the lowest in society are given an opportunity to thrive. You got to make sure that they are taken care of, that they've got that upward mobility, that they've got these things. And, I know I'm not claiming that the right has that completely figured out either, but like, it works better than communism. Politics aside, that's the key. And this applies to the kingdom inside of us, which is like, we all have like a bunch of different little sub-personalities in us. We've got these, we've got our social drive. We've got like our physical like health. We've got like the part of us that wants fun. We've got the part of us that wants money. We've got like all of these different things, all these different voices in us. And so it's like its own little internal society. And what does it mean to apply dignity to that? Well, what it means is that you have to take the deepest pains, even like the ones that are like, they seem, like whoever's suffering the most inside of you, you've got to care about that. And this is something that I think kind of just puts all of self-improvement in perspective, right? Like the guy who has decent money, but he's obsessed with making more money, even though his relationships are falling apart. It's like, nah, man, you've got a part inside of you that knows that that's fucked up, that that's like really bad, that like, and it's also probably causing you a lot of pain. But you gotta be brave enough to look at that. You gotta be willing to go to that poor little part inside of you and decide to care for it. Because otherwise, this whole thing that we build is just kind of like on it's building on sand, right? All these biblical metaphors today, but we want to build on rock. And the only way that we can do that is if we start going down into our pain. And this is why, like, when I'm coaching guys, like, that's the thing I'm always looking for. It's like, what's your biggest pain right now? So many guys, they've got their head in the clouds. They're like, oh, I want to be building, like, I want to be making 7 figures. I want to be doing this. I want to be doing that and the other. And meanwhile, they're, stuck on the couch playing video games. They're like, those concerns are way far off. And they're concerned with like what multi-million-dollar business they're going to build. And I'm like, and they just keep failing. They just keep, not being able to activate. And I'm like, man, you've got urgent bleeding neck pains in your life right now. You're not ready to take on that stuff yet. Go to the poor part inside of you and start cleaning up that neighborhood, right? Like start taking care of like basic health, basic, discipline, basic, like get your bills paid, like start there and then build up from that stable foundation. And when you do it like that, you start tapping into your pain. That pain becomes power, it becomes motivation. And it becomes like, oh, actually, I really want these things, right? Like I actually have this massive amount of emotional power that I can learn how to target, to tap into, to drive toward my goals. And so learning how to just do this, it requires that dignity. It requires you, like I was saying, to be able to trace down your energy, trace down your emotions to that core things that you want. And if you're moving from there, you're moving from the heart. And if you're moving from the heart, you're moving with real power. And so, yeah, that's like the big thing that I wanted to impart to you guys today, chat with you. I'd love to hear if anybody's got any thoughts or questions about any of that, but let's take a look at the chat here. Nathan said, yeah, you're saying at the core of who we are is good, gives me hope. I came from the Christian perspective, like you said, of condemning myself and beating myself over my sinful nature. Yeah, man, it's not helping you, and that's not making God happy. And, I know this because God's supposed to be the ultimate good father, right? And, I've got a daughter, and nothing tears me up more when my daughter is beating herself up, right? Like if she doesn't do it, she doesn't draw a picture good enough, or maybe she messes something up, she does something she's not supposed to do, and she's just, so upset about herself. Like she's a very conscientious girl, and she'll get down on herself sometimes. And it's like, that's not helpful. It doesn't help her behave better. If anything, it just makes her behave worse because she's crying, and then she'll, not participate in things and whatever. And so I had to really work with her and realize that it's okay that you make mistakes. We just got to identify what we did wrong and learn from it. That's it. That's the best you can do. And so it's like, if you're just beating yourself up, you're not going to get anywhere with that stuff. It's just profoundly ineffective. K-Dot says, how can one detach from empty status-seeking behaviors while still aiming and working towards productive goals? So the key, it's like I was saying, it's desire. It's about getting down into what you really want. And so when you find yourself pursuing some empty status, what you're essentially telling me is that when you trace that desire down, it's not actually something that you want. So this is something that I had to do in relation to fitness at one point in my life. I got really into lifting and all this kind of stuff. And I was getting into powerlifting and all of this kind of thing. And I started hurting my body. My body just didn't respond super well to powerlifting. It didn't like it. I would get some injuries and things like that. And I would get obsessive about it. And I had to ask myself, it's like, what do I actually want? And I was like, oh, I want to be huge. I want to be so strong. And it's like, do I really? It's like, what would that actually do for me? How would that change my life? And, frankly, I realized it didn't do anything for me. It just caused me a bunch of problems. And so at that point, it's like, okay, well, what do I want in relation to fitness? Well, I want to be generally strong enough. I want to be able to hit at least kind of like the 80-20 of my genetic potential. I don't want to be spending all my time in the gym. I do want my joints to feel good. I do want to be fit over the course of my life. And then once I realized I got clear on what I actually wanted to do, I was able to then evaluate how well am I moving toward that thing, instead of living in this social media fueled bubble of just getting bigger and stronger. Because once I realized that, it's like, and that feeling would come up. It's like, oh, you got to get bigger. You got to get stronger, blah, blah, blah. I was like, is that what I want? No, it's actually not what I want. I don't give a shit about that. Might it be nice if I could grab it for free? Yeah, sure. Why not? But am I willing to sacrifice for it? Nah, doesn't really matter. So the key then is always figure out, what do you actually really want? And then just put your energy into pursuing that thing. Yeah, Nathan. Anyone else got any questions here? Let me see. I know, I want to know if Willing's still here. Oh, Televis Live says, Mark, what is your opinion on the way Christianity has become very progressive and aims to make everyone feel good rather than stick to the principles that made it? I think it's a massive problem, It's a huge problem, all right? But there's also a balance to be struck here, because you kind of got the two extreme poles. You've got the, it doesn't matter what you do, just, God loves you, okay? That's one extreme. And you got the other extreme that's basically if you're not perfect, you're going to hell. All right. And I think both of those are pretty messed up. And I think that a lot of this kind of super progressive side of Christianity is a direct response to the super, judgmental side of Christianity prior. And so the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's it's actually kind of it's not even in the middle. It's both. The answer is, you should strive to become perfect, because that would be the best representation of your dignity. Jesus even asks you, hey, be perfect like I am perfect, okay? But you also need to accept God's infinite mercy. You need to accept that you have a sinful nature. And for you just hating on yourself for that is actually, it's unproductive on that path toward perfection. So like there has to be this balance between calling out things that are bad and being firm with it, but then also mixing in the appropriate level of compassion, support, understanding, and forgiveness for where the imperfections occur. And the goal is to have them in balance, right? You need to have them in balance. So like if you don't do that, then you're missing, half the equation, in my opinion. Maximum Potential says, hey, Mark, I've struggled with it since porn since I was 10. Now I'm 31. Watched your videos way back in 2017. You opened my eyes to it. Nowadays, I'm going on monthly streaks, but I can't ever seem to be totally free. All right, so if you're getting to like the monthly level, that's when the deep stuff starts to matter. It's like the 3 to 6 week range where all the repressed shit comes up. So I'm actually going to be probably my next stream. I'm planning on doing like a deep dive into like the phases of a reboot, like what to expect at different points. And so, at that point, it's usually because there's some deeper stuff. So it's like, what are the pains that tend to mount in your life that then lead you to, on a monthly-ish level, reaching for porn, right? Is it a thing with work? Is it a thing with your relationships? Is it like loneliness? Like what's going on there? What's the boiling point that comes up? And when you can identify what that thing is, you got to address it. You got to start fixing that thing. Otherwise, you're going to probably pretty much be stuck in that pattern. Sam says, I'm a firm believer in the idea of dignity, but as I grew up in an undignified environment, the feeling of lacking inherent worth is very deep. How can I condition myself to truly connect with my dignity? So, this is something that I deal with a lot when guys come to me and they've got abusive or neglectful backgrounds. And it's tough with that kind of stuff because when you are given you basically are shown a lack of love in your developmental years, you have no defense to that. It just communicates this message very strongly that you don't have inherent worth. And sometimes, it's just an absolute. It's like if a parent just abuses you for no reason, you get the message. It's like, hey, I don't matter. Right. And so your self-image is going to get damaged, like no matter what. And then sometimes it's just more conditional stuff where it's like your parents will only praise you if you get good grades, or they only praise you if you do the things that they like. But then when you do the things that they don't like, they, crack down on you. They tell you suck, like all this kind of stuff. And so people will internalize these messages, and it'll be very crippling if you want to step into a more dignified mode of being. And so there's like two ways to handle this. One, if the trauma's kind of deep, you dealt with some pretty rough stuff, then simply like going back into those experiences and rejecting the narrative can be really powerful. Like, hey, when that person treated me this way, they gave me the message that I was worth nothing. But guess what? I want to go back and I want to imagine that young version of myself, and I want to tell him the truth. I want to tell him that he does matter, that like he is okay, that this person is wrong, that this was not okay, and that like fundamentally there's nothing like wrong with you. You have dignity, you have worth, that kind of thing. And so like this sort of like regression sort of stuff where you're going back and you're clearing stuff up. And that can be something you can do on your own, potentially, if you're equipped for it. But some people need the guide of a therapist to do that kind of work. But, typically as a coach, I'm not so much about going into the past, I'm about moving forward. And so in those kind of situations, if you want to move forward, then it just comes down to looking at your life and being like, where am I not honoring my dignity? Where in my life am I failing to show myself proper love, care, sacrifice, etc.? And start with something that is meaningful and doable, something that like you're willing to start shifting right now. It could be something really small, like Jordan Peterson's famous for the whole like clean your room kind of thing. Yeah, it could be as simple as cleaning your room, deciding that, hey, I'm worth living in a relatively clean room and worth that sacrifice. And you start showing yourself that worth. And like when you sacrifice for your own benefit from a dignified place, you're going to start feeling your worth. Maybe it's something in a bigger way. Maybe you got some toxic relationship that frankly is beneath your dignity. Maybe you got to cut that off, right? And so if you want to heal this in a more proactive sense, it's about deciding, where can I make these changes? Where can I start showing myself some real love? And some things might seem too big at first. So just start where you're willing, where you feel like, yes, I'm ready to start caring for myself properly here. And as you practice that, then a lot of these wounds will get healed. See. Mike says, do you plan to continue your rugged productivity rugged productivity series? Yeah. Actually, the second episode was out. That was the last live stream, and I clipped the video from it. So, make sure that was actually my last video that I did, and I think that one's a useful one. So that's what actually inspired me to get into streaming, because it's like, I wanted to stop being so meticulous with my content. I wanted to do something kind of just where show up and get it done. And I walk you through my whole thought process for how to start getting moving ruggedly. And I think this is a really powerful one, like to get that, because if you can, like, progress responds to motion. Momentum is king when it comes to like making progress. So if you can find that way to just get started in a rugged manner, not get tripped up by perfectionism and all that kind of stuff, then you're going to get a tremendous amount of value from it. So, all right. Looks like we've kind of gotten through everything here. But hey, appreciate you guys for coming out here today. I really want to keep doing these live streams. If you guys got ideas for what you would like to see or whatever, feel free to hit me up on X or something like that. Shoot me your thoughts or drop a comment here below, because I want to get good at this. I'm not a great live streamer yet, and I'm sure there's ways we can make this more fun and interactive and that kind of thing. But yeah, this has been a blast. Really appreciate you being here. Ooyap, and I'll see you guys all next week sometime. I'm trying to get the notification and the schedule out earlier next week. So thank you. Peace.